Hello, today I'm going to tell you another terrible story. This is the mysterious billionaire murders, the story of Barry and Honey Sherman, who were billionaires who lived in Toronto, and they were found murdered in 2017. Barry was actually the 15th richest person in all of Canada. He was the CEO of this big company called Apotex, which was a generic drug manufacturing company. So, you know, when you can find the generic version of a lot of medications instead of like the name brand, his company would manufacture those medications. And so he was very, very successful with his career. He was married to Honey, and Honey was a big philanthropist. The two of them were very, very generous, very well known in the community. It's said that they donated up to $100 million to various charities, and they were very, very well regarded. In December of 2017, they were in the midst of selling their mansion in Toronto. They were also planning on, in the middle of meetings with architects and things like that, because they were building a new mansion. They were also just about to go to Florida for the holidays with their family, to spend time with their family. And so there was a lot going on during this time. On December the 15th, 2017, their bodies were discovered by a realtor. There was a lot of showings going on to potential buyers. It was actually the realtor who found them during a showing, which is just awful. Their bodies were discovered in the basement area. They had this big indoor pool, and they were found each of them were seated next to each other in a semi-seated position with a belt around each of their necks, sort of almost hanging them, but like tying them to this low railing that was around the deck of the autopsies revealed that they were both strangled, and that's how they ultimately died. Honey's face had some injuries to it, but they're unsure whether or not that was post-mortem or not. When I first heard about this story, I remember thinking, like, who would want to kill somebody like this old couple that was so generous and so successful and upstanding in their community and everything? It turns out they had a lot of enemies, a lot of potential people with motives. So it turns out that Barry, who was 70 at the time of his death, and Honey, who was 75, they actually had quite a lot of enemies. Barry was described as being very arrogant. He was extremely aggressive and kind of ruthless with his business dealings, which I guess is how he became so successful. But he just had a lot of enemies and a lot of competitors who sued him. He was in hundreds of lawsuits. Also, it said that a lot of these like big pharma competing companies were, out to sabotage him. He just had a lot of people through business dealings that potentially could have had reason to want to kill him. He also had a big family feud going on for years that was in like 10 years of litigation. In a nutshell, what happened was when he first got started in this whole business, his uncle Lou Winter was the one who had this company, and it was the generic drug manufacturing company. So when he died, Lou died in 1965, and then just a few weeks later, his wife died as well, which left all four of Barry's cousins, little young cousins at the time, left them orphaned. Barry ended up buying the company from his uncle Lou and taking it over and turning it into what it became. But the problem is he bought the company and sort of promised 5% to each of the boys. Years later, when he actually did get back in contact with these four cousins, they said that, he owed them 20% of his business, and he disagreed. Even though he technically, I guess, promised a portion of the business to his young cousins back in the day, he said, I was the one who built up the company into what it is today, and I don't owe you anything. So there's really bitter lawsuit that went on for years in the family. One of the four boys, one of the cousins, Carrie, was very vocal about how bitter and angry and hurt he was by Barry. After they had been murdered, he went on to tell people in interviews how he was positive that it was a murder-suicide and it wasn't a double homicide. It must have been his cousin Barry who did it. And in fact, he said, oh, years ago, Barry even asked me to find somebody to kill Honey because he's just such a bad guy. It turns out that was a lie. He just wanted to, was angry. There's also a theory that it was because the two of them were Jewish. In fact, Honey's sister, Mary, is convinced that this was a statement because they were quite vocal about, supporting Israel. So Barry and Honey, they had some children, and one of their daughters, Alexandra, wanted to make sure that the legacy of their charities was continued on. Their family was really afraid, and probably still are, since their murders remain unsolved, because there's so much uncertainty of who did it and why. The family was also extremely vocal about how dissatisfied they were with the police investigation, because when the bodies were found, initially the police told the public that there was no forced entry, which there wasn't. There was doors that were unlocked. There was no forced entry, but also that they weren't currently looking for any suspects, which really led the media to assume that the police were under the assumption that it was a murder-suicide, that Barry had done this somehow to both of them. And it took them 6 weeks before the police actually went to the public to say that their theory was that it actually was classified as a double murder. The family hired their own private investigative team to run a parallel investigation alongside the police. And these private investigators were also quite critical of how the police handled the whole investigation, saying that they missed some evidence at the home and that they really didn't follow up with different leads in a timely manner and that sort of a thing. In 2021, the police also went to the public and asked for their help because they had done a lot of searching around the neighborhood for different home videos, surveillance videos, to see if they could have any clues with that. And they were able, through these videos, to rule out everybody in the area. Everybody who they found on video had a legitimate reason for being there, except for this one person who was in the area of the home and sort of went on camera. They didn't reveal a lot of information, but basically this is a person of interest. They even called them a suspect. But the video isn't great. They sort of said, look at the way that this person has a unique walk. Maybe you can see who it is. They said that the person is between 5'6" and 5'9", but they couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman. So they're hoping that the public will still be able to come forward and say who this person is. Police really haven't revealed a lot other than the fact that they say the couple was targeted, and the family is still offering a $10 million reward to any information on who did this. Let me know what your theory is.